When we were in Vrindavan, we asked the question, like, who is your Prabhupada? Like, what does your Prabhupada look like? Who is your Prabhupada and describe it. And then we asked the question, what is not in your Prabhupada that should be, like something you blocked out of it. Like, in my Prabhupada, he's always like very kind and gentle. Well, what did you block out of your Prabhupada? Well, I blocked out all the chastisement and all the heavy lectures because I don't like that. And someone else kind of, their Prabhupada is this very heavy person, chastising, expressing Siddhanta, and they left out all the like soft part. So the obvious fact is Prabhupada is both. He's not one or the other. And it can be confusing because you will see Prabhupada in various manifestations according to who he's dealing with or the situation he's in. And it may appear that Prabhupada's very, very soft, very kind, empathetic, understanding. In other cases, it may appear that he's like a thunderbolt and you can't understand why is he so heavy? Why is he so angry? And it's important for us to understand Prabhupada in all ways because as disciples or grand disciples or grand disciples or grand, depending on the future, to represent Prabhupada, both not only in his teachings, but in his consciousness, his mood, his understanding, his feeling. Because as followers of Srila Prabhupada, one of our jobs is not just to represent how we feel, but to represent how he would feel about this particular situation. So, a lot of times we have our own feelings, obviously, all the time we have our own feelings about things, but as we progress, our feelings should kind of morph into representing how Prabhupada feels. That's what it means to be a disciple, right? That we would represent his feelings. And you can't perfectly represent his feelings if you don't know what they are, right? And so I think we should look at some of the various aspects of Prabhupada and how they manifested and what the context is for Prabhupada manifesting those things. Now, one of the most classic stories of Prabhupada's compassion for his disciples, a couple of them, one of them is quite well known. It's a disciple who wrote Prabhupada to tell him he's divorcing and remarrying. And so we know that Prabhupada discouraged divorce. He said that there are very heavy reactions if you get divorced. It was just, when you get married, it's for life and do it. And we know how challenging that is today. Statistically speaking, more than half the relationships will end in divorce. Well, half the official marriages will end in divorce, and then how many of the unofficial will end? Probably more. So Prabhupada wrote back to this devotee, and I don't know if he gave blessings, but he acknowledged it and he approved in some way, directly and indirectly approved. So why would Prabhupada approve of a divorce? Sometimes Prabhupada approved of separation. He saw that the relationship was not productive and they both wanted to live separately, and that would be the best thing. So he said, you can live separately. Although that may not have been the best thing for the children. But as we know, he never encouraged divorce. And in this instance, he's allowing a devotee to get divorced. So, as you may know, the story, Shrutikirti asked Prabhupada, he said, this is quite astonishing. You've never allowed this and you're allowing this. So why? And Prabhupada said, if I told him not to do it, he was going to do it anyway, and I could see he was going to do it anyway. And so this just shows Prabhupada's mercy. It's like incredible. Um, if I tell him to do it and he does it, then he's following my order. And I know he's going to do it. And if I tell him not to do it and he does it, he's disobeying my order. And to disobey the order of the guru is a great offense, and it therefore creates problems in a disciple's advancement. So, in order for Prabhupada to help his disciple advance, he didn't go against, he didn't tell him, don't do this, because he was going to do it, and then he would be disobeying. So that's unusual for a guru, traditionally to allow a disciple to do something that goes against his instruction. And this is, I think, one of many examples. I think the other examples are not so obvious. It's that a devotee is doing something and reporting that to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada would say, okay, continue doing that, I'm very happy. In the sense that Prabhupada knew this disciple was happy doing what he was doing. And so Prabhupada didn't want to give him an order to do something he couldn't do, and because he was happy doing this, Prabhupada wanted to encourage him. So you could say, in one sense, maybe not in every sense, but in one sense you could say this was Prabhupada's mercy that he was allowing devotees to engage in various services that they were inspired to do, even though maybe they could have done other things which would have been better for the mission, or maybe even better for their own spiritual life, but Prabhupada allowed them to do these things. So that's interesting. That means what's ever best for the disciple, even though if what is best for the disciple is A, but they can't do A, then Prabhupada is allowing them to do B and encouraging them to do B because B is good for them. Now, occasionally Prabhupada would tell disciples, don't do this, we don't need this. And often it was more advanced devotees who we needed to do specific things. And sometimes it was just that the disciple didn't explain it well. And once they explained it in a better way, Prabhupada would say, okay. But I would say for your rank and file devotee, if they were happily engaged, Prabhupada was happy. So Prabhupada was willing, you could say, to compromise his own principles or principles that he taught if that compromise was going to help his disciples. There's another story I told, this very heartwarming story in which a devotee that was dear to Prabhupada left ISKCON and Prabhupada went to see him. He had to fly to see him. And Prabhupada asked him, what did I do that caused you to leave? In other words, Prabhupada was willing to take responsibility. What did I do? And the idea was, what can I do now so that you would come back? So Prabhupada was willing to forego what is right and wrong and willing to take responsibility upon himself to rectify the situation. That's amazing. But he really loved that disciple, and he felt that that would bring the disciple back. And so his concern was, let us do what is best for the disciple. Let us do what will bring the disciple back. And so it's like in these two examples, he's not acting as a traditional guru. Traditionally, gurus chastise the disciples for their mistakes. Gaur-Chandar made a mistake, this devotee, and Prabhupada is apologizing. What did I do to cause you to leave? When it was no longer in Prabhupada's mind a question of who's right and wrong. It was a question of how we can bring this devotee back. And as you know, many sannyasis later became grihastas. And Prabhupada later engaged them in important services. And they were afraid that they would be rejected because they gave up their sannyas, which is it's a big offense. But Prabhupada did not reject them. He engaged them and said, well, it doesn't matter, sannyas, grihasta, it doesn't matter. You just engage in devotional service. So somehow or other, Prabhupada was willing to make adjustments in order that his disciples would be. Can somebody turn off my notifications? I turn them all off and still they sneak in. I need a 7-year-old Chinese girl to do that to help me here. I know. I can see what's making the notifications. How come when I go to my notifications, it doesn't show all the... Does anybody know? Where do you go to get the whole list of notifications? Because when I hit notifications, it doesn't give me a list. Anyway, I have a good idea. I'll just mute it. Okay, I think I solved the problem. I don't need a 7-year-old Chinese girl. I may have done it myself. Okay. So I'm telling these stories so that we can represent Prabhupada in his mood, and his mood was more important than sticking strictly to a principle. If the principle can be adjusted in a way which will help the disciple advance, then that's more important than sticking to the principle. Always, creating a favorable situation, a positive situation. Doesn't mean Prabhupada wouldn't chastise. He would. It doesn't mean he wouldn't correct. He would, of course. So this is principle 1. Prabhupada is willing to adjust as is needed if it's going to be helpful for disciples' advancement. Well, let's give another example. As you may know, in the beginning of the movement, Prabhupada was involved in matchmaking and performing marriage ceremonies. He was helping choose, encouraging disciples to marry, and actually doing the fire yagyas, being the priest to marry them. And Prabhupada said, I am criticized by my godbrothers as being a matchmaker. And Prabhupada said, sannyasis do not take part in arranging and performing marriages. It's not their seva. And dealing with marriage problems, which Prabhupada had to deal with marriage problems. So sannyasis do not deal with marriage problems. It's not their seva. But he did it. Why did he do it? Because it was necessary for his disciples' advancement. So he's willing to adjust principles. He shouldn't go over the ocean. Sannyasi should not go over the ocean. Some people would say you should never leave Vrindavan. But if it will help the preaching, if it will help individual people, he'll do it. I just heard a story. It's an interesting story along these lines, just more examples. A devotee wanted to learn astrology, and he asked Prabhupada, and he said, there's no need to learn astrology, because Prabhupada, he wants us to learn Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Gita, and so forth, so we can preach it. And this devotee was very passionate about astrology. He really wanted to do it. When you're passionate about something and how you just dream about doing it, and so he really wanted to do it. And so he was thinking that through astrology, I could use it as an entrance way to preaching by doing people's astrology, explaining that these things are karmically ordained, what is karma, and how how you can deal with them through tolerance and equanimity and so forth. So he explained that to Prabhupada, that I could use this as a gateway to preach. And Prabhupada said, oh, if you can use it for preaching, then go ahead. So here's another example how many times when Prabhupada was analyzing the propriety of something, whether something was proper or not, he would analyze it in terms of its effect, preaching effect. You may remember the story. There was a movie called, I forget what the movie was called. I think it was Life Comes from Life. It was a drama played by devotees. And all the conversations were about, I'm not the body, life is not a combination of chemicals, consciousness is not a byproduct of the mind and so forth. And there was no kirtan in it. It was just two devotees acting out as students on a campus, having discussions and showing them in classrooms, and the devotee playing the professor in the classroom. It was a drama. And so they showed that movie to Prabhupada, and there were a lot of sannyasis there. And after the movie, Prabhupada said, what does everybody think? And the sannyasis were thinking, there's no kirtan, there's no tilak, there's no shaved head. This is like, some strangely devotee said, I think this is like for women and children, and I guess the connotation was women and children are simple and not philosophical. So this is, like we say sometimes, this is for grandmothers. This is for your you go to India and go to a temple and it's all widows. Oh yeah, bhakti's for widows. That was the connotation. And so Prabhupada asked Yadubar, who made the film, he said, what do people say? And he said, well, I showed the film, and after the film a man came up to me and he said, now I can understand that I'm not the body. And then Prabhupada said, oh, the film is successful. It's helping people understand they're not the body. So Prabhupada was looking at it very practically, not in terms of, well, how much kirtan is there? How much is the name Krishna mentioned? How many shlokas of the Gita are being recited and so forth? He was looking at it in terms of what's the result? Is this bringing people closer to Krishna? And there's nothing else wrong with it. It's not sinful. It's not deviant. It's not apasiddhanta against our philosophy. So by looking at the result, then Prabhupada said, yes, it's good. So I think this is important for us when you're analyzing the validity of anything. If there's no compelling reason to say something is wrong, then what validates it is its effect in either helping you or helping others become Krishna conscious. That's how Prabhupada would validate it. And vice versa, if we're making a big effort to do something and it's not producing any result, then often Prabhupada would say, well, why do it? Why waste the money and energy? Now, in the case of establishing a temple and wanting to close a temple, Prabhupada said no, because you invited Krishna, you can't kick him out now. This is his home. So there are spiritual principles also, where you can't just look at something entirely materially. And so we have to be aware of those principles, otherwise we could make the wrong decisions. That was a common problem, devotees wanting to close temples. Even moving temples was a big thing. It says you're moving Krishna, he's in the house, don't move him. So these things had to be thought out, and these are spiritual principles. So it's not entirely a pragmatic thing. This helps the preaching, therefore do it. We also have to make sure that it's not going against our principles. But if it's not going against our principles, and it maybe for many devotees they don't see the need to do it, or they can't validate doing it based on any positive principles, although it's not violating any principles. This is how Prabhupada would look at it in terms of how is this helping the spreading of Krishna consciousness. So our job, as I said, is to represent Srila Prabhupada. And so we've discussed two ways we can represent him: through understanding, adjustment, and compassion. This is another form of adjustment, by adjusting on the basis of what's best for preaching, and initially what's best for the devotee. Now, there were conversations in which Prabhupada would ask a devotee or devotees, "What do you want to do for Krishna?" And they naturally would say, "Prabhupada, what do you want me to do? You're my guru, so tell me what to do." And Prabhupada would say, "No, I want to know what you want to do." Of course, Prabhupada has given us so many things to do. He's told us, open temples, distribute books, make devotees, etc., write articles, publish books, spread Krishna consciousness. But often Prabhupada would want to know what you want to do, or would often see what is the best way to engage a devotee. So that kind of falls under this umbrella of what Prabhupada making decisions based on what is best for the devotees. Now, sometimes the devotees would say, "I want to do this," and Prabhupada could see it would not be good for that devotee, and he would tell them not to do it. Or there, as I said, there may be cases of senior devotees who have managerial positions who want to give up those positions, and Prabhupada didn't want them to do. So I'm speaking generally here. There is a devotee who was in a managerial position and was feeling uncomfortable, not properly situated according to his nature. And Prabhupada said something which I think we can all benefit from. Prabhupada said, "Okay, find what you want to do and focus on that for the rest of your life." Wow. What did Prabhupada mean by that? Don't be teeter-tottering, going from one service to another, indecisive, and do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Find something you can focus on and then just go into it and do that, because that way you'll become steady. And if you like it, it's very easy to focus on it. If it's your nature, it's very easy to focus on it. So I think that's an important instruction. Prabhupada encouraged us to do what we like doing, but also steady. Do that. Don't be, as we would say, mental. Find it, do it, stick with it, focus on it. Do that your whole life. Find that thing you can do your whole life and just keep working on it, whatever that may be. Art, music, teaching, management, business, organization, and so forth. And so be steady, be stable. So Prabhupada, he looked at service, and we should look at service for ourselves this way also, as service as a absolute necessity for our spiritual advancement, and a service that we can enthusiastically do every day is very, very valuable for ourselves. And in the same way, if we're representing Prabhupada to others, then we want to represent that mood in engaging others and doing service which inspires them, because if they're inspired by their service, it's very good for their spiritual life, and ultimately service is for our benefit more than it is for anyone else's benefit. Krishna doesn't need our service, right? Like Krishna calls you up and says, "I need help spreading Krishna consciousness." No, Prabhupada said, no, he doesn't need help. He could do it all himself, but he lets us help him. That's his mercy. So therefore, service is really for us, and then if we have a service that's inspiring, that's really good. Now, you might say, well, isn't it good sometimes to do something you don't like? Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. It's an austerity, and it does build character and strength. And so there may be many things we don't like to do, like I like to teach, but I have to fly halfway around the world and live like a sardine for 10 hours on an airplane. So I don't like that. But that's part of what has to be done until I get a very wealthy disciple who can buy me business class or first class even. Yeah. So when I arrive, I'm not half dead. Lately, I've been more than half dead when I arrive. I'm getting older. It happens, you just live, you get older, it just happens, the body gets older. It does weird things when it gets older. So, Prabhupada, would sometimes demand austerity, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, and it's not good to do things you don't like to do. It does build strength. But generally, in the course of your service, you will have to do things you don't like to do. I create courses. I love to create courses, but it's difficult. It's austere. You have to get into a minutia of detail sometimes, and my brain just doesn't like detail. But I have to do it, and then I have to market it. And I don't like marketing. I like producing but sometimes I'm the one who has to market it because no one else is doing it. So there's naturally going to be things, even in the service you like to do, there are going to be austerities that you don't like to do. And in addition, there may be just necessities that we have to engage in for the welfare of the Hare Krishna movement, and certainly we shouldn't run away from them in the name of, I don't want to do that. But the main service we're doing, generally it should be something, ideally it should be something we can really dedicate ourselves to do. And also when we're engaging others, we should be conscious of this. Now, kind of moving to the other side, like the heavier side, like why would Prabhupada be upset about something? Well, one of the reasons he would be upset about something is his disciple is doing something that's very bad. And he either needs to correct the disciple and or needs to correct the movement so the movement understands this is wrong. So sometimes you will chastise someone as a lesson to everybody. And it's like, why is Prabhupada getting so heavy? This is a lesson for everybody. And so he has to get heavy with one person. So if something is wrong and it's not corrected, that means it's going to continue to be wrong. And so it has to be corrected. And you may know or may not know, but probably you do know, if something is wrong and it's corrected lightly, you tend to think it's not that wrong. And if something is corrected very heavily, then you think, that's really wrong. You don't get it unless the correction has the frequency of the offense, the significance of the. If it's a significant wrong, it needs a significant correction for us to register. Have you noticed that? If it's not strong, you think, it must not be that important. It wasn't that strong. So sometimes Prabhupada had to make strong corrections to send a message to both individuals and the movement. This is really bad. And often, you may have heard these stories, where Prabhupada would be very, very angry, like, why is he so angry? It doesn't seem like what was done was so bad. And is Prabhupada angry personally? No, he's angry to make a point, and therefore he's showing a high level of anger to show that this was a very serious mistake. Usually the mistake will be either to minimize his position, to minimize a principle that would minimize the effectiveness of ISKCON or the effectiveness of bhakti, or to misrepresent a truth so that it becomes a concoction, not a proper philosophy that Prabhupada taught, but something else. And those things not only required loud and hard correction, but they were upsetting to Prabhupada because it was gnawing at the foundation of ISKCON, that if these things were allowed, it could destroy ISKCON. So naturally, he would become heavy. So if Prabhupada ever becomes heavy about something, we should raise our ears and eyes and notice it. This is pretty serious. And if you don't understand why it's serious, then talk to a more senior devotee and say, Prabhupada was very upset about this. Can you explain to me why? Because I don't understand. It doesn't seem like such a big thing. So we should understand what Prabhupada was upset about, because the things that he was upset about likely will happen, or maybe we're even doing them ourselves, or we will see other people doing them, and we need to know, because if we don't know, we can't correct anybody, or if we don't know, then we'll continue making the same mistake ourselves, and this is obviously a problem. The misunderstanding of the philosophy, the misapplication of the philosophy was one of the main concerns that Srila Prabhupada had. Concoction, creating new things that didn't exist. Prabhupada once expressed an anxiety he had after he left that they will change things, because Prabhupada said your Western mentality is to change. Not that things shouldn't be changed, but some things should not be changed. And he said that you would. His one fear was you'll change the deity worship standards. Deity worship standards are standards. They have been and always will be the same standards. It's not like in the future we can have AI robots doing RT, which I'm sure someone in some temple with lots of deities and not a lot of devotees may think in the future, well, this could solve the problem. You know? They can roll chapatis, that's okay, but they can't make the offering. You know, so it's good that we know when Prabhupada was upset about something, why? What was he upset about? And one of the things we saw Prabhupada was upset about was minimizing the spiritual master, minimizing his position, because ISKCON, he's the founder of ISKCON, and ISKCON functions based on respect of his position and his teachings, and if that's minimized, and he's replaced as the founder Acharya, then everything is finished. One time devotees were saying Prabhupada is actually God, you know, it's just Mayavad. And Prabhupada said, if you say I'm God, it means you also can become God, and then everything is finished. So, you know, Prabhupada is expending blood, sweat, and tears to establish God as a person, and that we're not God. And if in any way there's even a scent of preaching that we and God are one, more than in quality, but in quantity, then that would, Prabhupada would come in like a fire truck and put out that fire. So, you know, if you ever think Prabhupada's heavy, then you should always understand there's a reason that he's heavy, and it's probably a Siddhantic principle or a principle in deity worship that's not being followed properly. Prabhupada showed a lot of concern about the deities, how they were taken care of. Prabhupada installed deities in ISKCON directly or through his representatives. So to have deity means you're calling Krishna. So when you call Krishna, you invite a guest, you take care of them. And so Prabhupada was personally concerned that everyone he called, every deity he called for was being taken care of. And if there were any offenses made to those deities, pretty much that would destroy Prabhupada in every way. It would break his heart. It would frustrate him, because it's a relational. This is Krishna, his Supreme Lord, who he's brought here to be honored and taken care of and worshiped properly. And if that didn't happen, he would become very upset, rightly so, and so should we. So anger is an emotion which comes often as a byproduct of love. When your loved one is offended, if you don't become angry, we would question that you actually love that person, wouldn't we? Like, have you ever been in a situation in a person who someone is supposed to love is hurt, and the person who's supposed to love them shows apathy? Or they're in a dangerous situation and they seem to not care. They've been offended, they don't protect them, then you naturally question, it doesn't seem like this person loves the person, because if they did, they would be really upset, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So a lot of times we see, I don't know if it's a lot of times, but many times we'll see Prabhupada was upset because of neglect of the deities. That's out of love. He's very angry. And the greater the anger, the greater the love. And so if we love the deities and the deities are being offended, we should be angry also. Or if there's something If we love Prabhupada and there's some offense being made to Prabhupada, we should be angry. If we love Prabhupada and there's something that is not followed properly, we should be angry. And your anger can manifest in various ways. It doesn't always manifest as yelling and shouting. Sometimes it manifests as correction. But sometimes it may manifest as upset, disappointment, concern, and so forth, out of love for the movement or out of love for the deities or out of love for a project that someone established and that project is now being minimized for some reason, unfairly, unduly, and the project is important and it should be maintained. And you know this is something Prabhupada wants. And so you're concerned, and you should be concerned. The other thing, which I think is evident from the self-care course, is that Prabhupada was concerned about our own sadhana and our own practice. And the reason Prabhupada was concerned is that we are conditioned souls. And if you want to know, what it means to be a conditioned soul, imagine you just got arrested, falsely arrested, and you're put in prison, and you're going to be there your whole life. And you're going to be obviously not associating with devotees and never again seeing deities and so forth. And you're going to be living with non-devotees. And if you think about that and ask yourself the question, would I be able to remain a devotee the rest of my life? There's probably I'm not sure I could in that situation. Because I would be overcome by my conditioning and the conditioning of the environment I'm in. And that, I think, is obvious. And Prabhupada knew that better than we did. And therefore his stress on sadhana, rising early, chanting properly, and so forth, was to prevent us from having what's called, when you have a disease and you get over it and the disease comes back, what is that called? There's a name for it. I'm forgetting the name. The disease reoccurs. Who knows the name? What is it? Why can't I remember the name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Remission? No, relapse. Yeah. Remission, relapse, maybe, yeah. You have a relapse. So, you may be doing well in Krishna consciousness, but if your sadhana slackens, you'll have a conditioning relapse. As Prabhupada said, your good old habits will come back. That was sarcastically, Prabhupada would say. The good old habits come back. And you already know that if your sadhana is slack, the good old habits start to enter your mind, or at least the desire for them. What to speak if you have no sadhana? So Prabhupada understood our weaknesses, he understood our disease, and he knew that we needed the medicine of sadhana, and we had to take it every day. And it's like antibiotics. I say, you take these antibiotics for 10 days. You got to take what about 3 antibiotics that destroy bacteria? I don't want to take them. No, you have to take them for 10, because if you don't, it's not going to completely cure the infection. So it's like sadhana is like that. No, you have to do it every day. It's not like one day you're just like, hey, today's Sunday, no sadhana. We're sleeping in late. I've got momentum from the last 6 days. It's not like that. We're conditioned souls, right? You know what it means to be a conditioned soul. As I joke, as I joke, if you don't understand what it means to be a conditioned soul, just stop chanting Hare Krishna and stop sadhana for a week. And you'll understand how conditioned you are, because that conditioned nature will just start to come back. It's there. With sadhana holds it at bay, and sadhana purifies it. So this is why Prabhupada stressed sadhana so much. It's like, this is how we are going to overcome our conditioning. It is through sadhana that we will be purified. There's no other way. Harinam, 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 Eva Kevalam. There's no other way. Only through chanting, at least 16 rounds, good rounds. You must do this every day. You must rise early. You're not going to chant good rounds if you're not up early. If you're not hearing Shastra, if you're not worshiping the deities, your consciousness is going to suffer. You need to do these things every day. Prabhupada understood that better than we do. We need to understand that for ourselves and for others. So the fundamental part of the mission of ISKCON is that we all become pure devotees and go back to Godhead. That was Prabhupada's mission. He came to pick us up and take us back to Godhead. And we cannot take others back to Godhead if we're not going ourselves. So the second half of the mission, bringing others, is a byproduct of the first half. So this is Prabhupada's concern. Thousands of letters, chant 16 rounds, do sadhana properly, emphasizing over and over and over again. We have to emphasize that in our own lives and emphasize that for others. And then we will represent Srila Prabhupada. We talked the other day in class, I guess maybe it was Friday if you were there, about chastisement, why Prabhupada chastised. And Prabhupada said, chastisement is the love of the Guru. So the Guru is taking care of the disciple. But as we said, sometimes there is no way to rectify a disciple without chastising. That sometimes you can rectify just by talking or by showing the proper example. But sometimes you can only rectify through chastisement. Or as we said, the disciple can only understand the significance of an offense if the Guru gets upset enough. Like, this is really bad, don't do that. And get very heavy. So when we see Prabhupada's chastisement is very heavy, it's because he's trying to make a heavy point, or the offense was very heavy. And so, you may not like to chastise and be heavy, but sometimes you need to, right? If we're going to represent Prabhupada properly, we have to be detached. Sometimes you have to be nice when you don't want to be, and sometimes you have to be heavy when you don't want to be. And so Prabhupada was both. It's not like Prabhupada liked chastising. He said that a guru does not like to chastise. He would be happier if he didn't have to chastise, but sometimes the guru has to chastise for the benefit of the disciple. It's a thankless task, because naturally Vaishnava is amanina manadena, respectful to all and not wanting respect for himself. So he doesn't like to chastise, but service of a guru may sometimes be to chastise. Service of superior may sometimes be to chastise. So following Prabhupada's example, we may sometimes have to be heavy, and then we may have to sometimes be nice when we feel like chastising, because the chastising isn't going to help. So then we're encouraging, we're soft, and we're sweet. Hare Krishna. So I tried to give a 360 of Prabhupada, from his kindness to his chastisement. And I think there's one other thing. I may remember more than one more, but another thing is Prabhupada represented his Guru Maharaj, like what his Guru Maharaj taught in practical terms. Book distribution number 1, that was the main focus of Prabhupada's mission, because he learned that from his Guru. Dioramas, making dolls and taking exhibitions. Of course, and the main principles of our morning program, that's all traditional, and deity worship is all traditional. So the disciple he's representing the mission and the mood and the nature of his spiritual master. And so as followers of Prabhupada, in execution, then we should execute things as Prabhupada set the example, and both in practical ways and in mood. And then if we do all these, we can represent Prabhupada, and then through successive generations, people will understand Prabhupada through you, because you will manifest those qualities. And if you ever think that's just for Prabhupada's disciples, you're wrong. It's for everybody. And if you don't do it, who's going to do it? Some of you are like you're 30, right? So by the time you're 40, 45, most Prabhupada disciples will not be here. And you will be the ones that people are going to look to understand Prabhupada, because you're like the next generation after Prabhupada. And you had personal association with Prabhupada's disciples, so you may think, oh, I'm so far from Prabhupada, that people who come after you will think, no, you're very close, because your gurus are all Prabhupada disciples. Now those gurus are gone, and the gurus we're getting are disciples of Prabhupada. So you're fortunate you had, and so I know a lot of you think, well, I didn't meet Prabhupada, so how could I properly understand his mood, represent him, and so on. I was saying last week that when asked, how much time did you spend with Prabhupada? When I calculate I was wrong, Chaitanya Dasi was five morning walks. I just got a picture of another morning walk. I don't know if it was posted. On... You're not going to be able to see this, but maybe you can see it. I'm in that picture in the gray. That should have been, that's 1972. Can you see? So I was on 5 morning walks. What I remember, 5 morning walks. More or less. Could be 4, it could be 6. Probably 5 or 6. I was in Prabhupada's room 2 times, I remember. I was in Prabhupada's garden twice. I was in over 100 classes, probably, 150 maybe. So, and then, in those classes, you see Prabhupada coming in from the morning walk, so even if you weren't on it, you get to see him. So how many hours were you with Prabhupada? So you can add up like 150 classes, let's say that's like 100 hours. And the walks are like a half hour each, so it's over 100 hours. But I was saying, but I have to add to that all the morning walks I listened to, all the conversations I listened to, all the classes I listened to. So then if I say, well, I was with Prabhupada 150 hours, I say, no, I was with him for thousands of hours, because I heard thousands of lectures and morning walks and conversations. And then I think the obvious place we're going with this is, how much time have you spent with Prabhupada? Well, how many morning walks did you listen to? How many conversations? How many classes? How many books have you read? Add up the time, and that time obviously will increase every day. That's how much time you spent with Prabhupada. Right? Correct? Yes? Correct? Only correct. Yes, you are correct. So, so I think that's important, and you could spend more time with Prabhupada than his own disciples, right? Is that possible? You could spend more time with Prabhupada than his own disciples. You could come to know Prabhupada better than his own disciples. You could become closer to Prabhupada. And the point is, you have to be, because the world is going to depend on you. Who is the founder Acharya of ISKCON? They're going to depend upon you to represent him. They're going to depend upon you to teach what he taught, not only his teachings, but the mood behind the teachings, the actions behind the teachings. And those actions and moods have been set by Prabhupada, and we need to understand them. So it's not just that Prabhupada's disciples are representing Prabhupada. I study every biography that's written, I've read. Every memory video of Prabhupada I've heard multiple times. Every morning walk, I listen to lectures all the time. I'm always studying Prabhupada, because I feel like, for my personal benefit and for the benefit of those I teach, this is what I need to do. You also need to do the same thing. It's not just, I'm not initiated by Prabhupada. Do you realize that the most important spiritual master in your life is your Siksha Guru, not your Diksha Guru? Now, your Diksha Guru may be the most important Siksha Guru you have also. And often it is, but not necessarily. Some devotees are initiated and they have not a lot of interaction with their Diksha Guru, or they may be inclined to hear from other gurus more than their own guru. And so the other guru becomes their Siksha Guru, and that Siksha Guru is actually playing a more important role. So you say, Prabhupada's not my Diksha Guru, all right, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is whose example and teachings have the most effect on you. And so Prabhupada's teachings and example can have the same effect on you as it has on me. It's not like you can't have that effect. He can be your Siksha Guru as much as he's my Siksha Guru. And if he's my Diksha Guru and not my Siksha Guru, and he's not your Diksha Guru and he's your Siksha Guru, then you're better off than I am. Because the real benefit of the Guru comes from his Siksha. Right? Yes? That's where the benefit, it's the instructions. Siksha means instruction. It's the instructions that take you back to Godhead. The initiation is not what takes you back to Godhead. That initiation only took an hour. It's the instruction. It's the connection to those instructions. So that's very important. And so I think you all understand that. I've probably stated that multiple times, but maybe you didn't understand it in relation to Prabhupada. And so that means your connection with Prabhupada is not in any way limited by time or space. And, it's natural as conditioned souls, we think, well, I didn't see him, I'm not initiated by him, so my relationship is different than his disciples. And it's only different if you think it is or allow it to be. Otherwise, it doesn't have to be in any way. He is your Siksha Guru. He'll take you back to Godhead through his instructions. Your Guru is helping you understand him, giving you his instructions. Your Guru's instructions are his instructions. He's foundational. And the world, the future of the world will depend upon you being able to represent Prabhupada. That will be the effectiveness of your preaching, that you can properly represent Prabhupada. So don't ever think otherwise. This is one of your main goals. And that was the idea of this class, to help you better represent Prabhupada. So we can go to the chat and see if there's any questions. Sydney says her health has improved, Krishna's mercy. Maybe it was his mercy that you were sick. Who knows? You know that story? This young man lost his horse, and then, or he got a horse. Something like, and the friend said, God's mercy, and it said, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And then he crashed on the horse, got in an accident. And the person said, oh, that's bad. And he said, well, maybe it's not bad, you don't know. And because he crashed on the horse, he wasn't drafted into the army. So that was mercy. Yeah, there's stories like that. So Krishna's mercy comes in different ways. What can we do if we hear or see something that we deeply feel is apasidanta? Can we address it as a neophyte devotees? How do we properly and politely address it if it is more senior devotees are the ones who are speaking? It will vary according to the situation and the personalities involved, but one way, the problem is if you address an issue, I was saying you could go to the GBC, but the problem with that is if you address it to the GBC, then the GBC talks to that devotee and they're going to say, Chaitanya Dasi said that you said this in class. So if you present it to the GBC, first what you would want to do is say, this seems wrong to me, I want to ask you, do you think this is wrong? And GBC says, yes, it's wrong, and say, well, this was spoken in class by so-and-so. I just leave it up to you to correct it, but please don't mention my name because it'd harm our relationship. And he would feel like I'm turning against him and we're very close and so on and so forth. So it has to be done sensitively. But I don't think it's a problem for GBC or any senior devotee and say, this appears to be wrong, what was said in class, but I'm just a young devotee, this is a senior devotee. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? And if the person says, no, I think you're right, then, okay, well, what do we do about it? And he might say, I'll talk to him, he's my friend. Or we'll talk to the GBC or something. As I've said many times, you do everything with etiquette. Do you realize that some devotees, because of what they said, are not allowed to visit certain temples? That does happen. So we just had this really interesting class this morning for translators. It was only translators. And I said, what do you do if the speaker says something that you know is offensive to the audience? Or the speaker says something that within our culture is inappropriate, that maybe in his culture isn't. Do you translate it exactly? Do you not say it, or do you reword it? We had a whole discussion on that. And the conclusion we came up with is that in general, we would not say it, or we would reword it, and we would let the speaker know in advance that anything that we feel is inappropriate would be reworded or left out, because it could be damaging. So, that information sometimes needs to go back to the speaker. He may not know. Right? Correct? Did that answer the question? Now, obviously, you may think it's opposidantic, and it's not. You may be opposidantic. So that said, you always have to, approach it humbly. According to what I understand, this seems to be wrong. I could be wrong. That's, humility. That's proper. But if something seems to be wrong and we don't say anything, then we're part of the problem, and there could be some reaction for that. Sometimes we stay quiet because we know there's nothing we can do. It doesn't matter who we say or what we say. Some devotees will speak up in class and say, this point you made, I'm confused because I've heard other people say this. And it appears you're saying the opposite. Could you explain it? Gives him a chance to explain it, gives him a chance to make sure you've understood what he originally said. So that could be done if it's respectful. Just say, I'm confused because you said this, but I've heard this from other speakers. Or I heard a lecture in which Prabhupada said this, July 17th, 1976, in Washington, D.C., Prabhupada said this, which appears to contradict what you said. Could you explain it? And so that gives him an opportunity and the whole audience an opportunity to have discussion. And then if what he said was, maybe he realizes, oh yeah, what I said is I need to explain more. I didn't explain it enough, or perhaps I wasn't clear. And it gives an opportunity for discussion. So other people may say, well, actually what Chaitanya Dasi is saying is correct. Like seniors may say that Prabhupada did say this and that. So that is, kind of, in a sense, the responsibility of the audience, but it has to be done humbly. And you could say, you made the statement, I don't understand it because I've heard Prabhupada say this. Are you saying the same thing or differently, or can you explain it? So that way you can bring it up. And then maybe it'll get clarified on your part, or he'll clarify it. That's your duty, Chaitanya Dasi. And Chaitanya Dasi is saying, yeah, but if I do that, I'll do that every class. That's okay. They'll be afraid to say anything wrong when you're in class, because they know if they do, you're going to bring it up. Now, there's another thing to understand. Sometimes when there were disagreements, Prabhupada would say something like, "What's your problem? The Acharyas can disagree. It's not a problem. We're individuals." So, there's enough room in the spiritual world for different opinions, right? So that's to be understood also. And say, well, my Guru Maharaj believes this way, and so another Guru is teaching something else, and say, okay, there's room for both. It may be just angles of vision, looking at the same thing. The 5 blind men touching the elephant, and it may be different realizations, different tastes, and so forth. There's a nice point by Jyotirmayi. Well, not even my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Kadambakana Swami, ever met Prabhupada, and he wasn't Prabhupada's disciple, but this didn't prevent him from being a real Prabhupada's man. Yeah, perfect example. And then we can all be Prabhupada men or women, or whatever your preferred pronouns are. We're all female, in case you don't know. Prakriti, soul is Prakriti, female, so even the men are she. You can call me she, because we're Prakriti, right? Or, if you want to be more philosophical, you can call me it, because I'm a soul. It. The soul, the way the soul is described in the Gita is not male or female. It's just like the soul is. It's kind of an it. It is beyond. What are you? Just call me. My pronoun is it. The soul is. I am. Yeah. And if you go down in the chat, you'll see this picture. This is San Diego, California, 1972. In the back right is a truck, and had a sign that said Krishna book on it. That was a traveling Sankirtan van filled up with Krishna books. It was one of the first parties in the world that would go on the road distributing Krishna books. And that was the party that discovered plain clothes. We always would go out in dhotis and saris. Dhoti and sari. That was the party that discovered plain clothes, because they were getting kicked out of malls, and they thought, well, if we wear regular clothes, the security won't see us. But as in dhotis and saris, saffron dhotis are kind of easy to spot, right? Shaved head and ponytail. So they put on wigs and ordinary clothes, and they found book distribution increased because people would stop. Whereas if you're in a dhoti or sari, people already know what you're doing, so if they're not interested, they wouldn't stop. So you don't have a chance to interest them. So that was the party that discovered that. Now, Prabhupada is walking in the temple here, and you can see that little blue road that's going into a back door. It's not the front door. So if you walk on that blue pavement and you go straight up, don't turn right, straight up, that will take you up to the temple. But on the vertical part of the stairway, the part that goes up, so you have the stairs and then they go up. I would call this the vertical part, for lack of a better word, because it's going vertically. There was a Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Ram, Hare Ram. So 4 steps, the Maha Mantra. And Prabhupada wouldn't walk over the steps. And he said, Krishna is none different than his name. So he walked in the back door, through the laundry room. The beautiful thing about, on this walk, I can tell you 2 things about this walk that I remember. That's why I don't remember how many walks I went on, because I don't remember if I went on more than one in San Diego. But if you go 1, 2, 3 blocks behind where we're coming from a park, 1, 2, 3 blocks up, there's a park. It's called Balboa Park. Huge park. There was a World's Fair in that park, I think, in the 20s or 30s. And so there's a lot of older Spanish-style buildings. Quite impressive. It's got one of the best zoos in the world. So we walked in that park, and there was one devotee's name is Treya Rishi, and he said, "Is this like Vrindavan?" Prabhupada looked around and he saw a lot of these big buildings and big grassy areas, and he said, "No, it's like Dwarka." Because Dwarka is opulent, and everywhere in Dwarka you could see a park. And there was a trophy shop 1 or 2 blocks before the temple. There was a trophy shop on the corner. And Prabhupada said, "What is that?" And they explained, And Prabhupada said, "Oh, you should ask them if they can make Radha Krishna deities." And I don't know if it was just like Prabhupada just making light talk or he was actually serious. None of us, I don't think we ever did. But, it just shows how the mind of a pure devotee is. That, he sees trophies and he thinks Radha Krishna deities. Another beautiful thing about Prabhupada's visit here is the temple room was really small. So if you're in that temple room, you couldn't have been at most where the Vyasasana was placed. At most you were 20 feet from Prabhupada. That means most of the people in the temple were 10 feet or closer. So it's like we were all just right up on Prabhupada. And sometimes you'll see Prabhupada sitting on a Vyasasana, and behind the Vyasasana is a black and white of the Panchatattva that looks like it's about 10 feet tall. You ever seen that picture? If you haven't, someday you'll notice there's a black and white Panchatattva. There's several pictures, one outdoors, so they took it outdoors, and one in the temple. So I was doing Sankirtan downtown, and there was this place that made posters, and it was like, it said you can blow up a poster like 10 feet high for like $12. And, I'm on Sankirtan collecting money. I was like, $12? Let's get it. So I had them blow it up like 10 feet high. I don't remember how we got it home. I was just like a little kid excited, And so that's where that came from. But super small temple room, you could pack in maybe 40 people max. So it was just basically the temple room was it was the living room in the house. So you can imagine it was quite small. And they just had their 50th anniversary. The deities were installed in 1973. And that little temple room, very intimate. So Prabhupada's mercy that he came there just because the devotees were doing service and he wanted to encourage them. And that's why he came. He was happy with their service. And he is merciful upon us, and we got to go on a walk with him and just have his darshan and re-energize ourselves in his presence. Hare Krishna. I like that. I like Jyotirmayi. I think your point is so valuable, and I think we should all meditate on that point and share that point with devotees. Like look at Kadambakana Maharaj. And now I think Keshava Maharaj is starting to initiate disciples. So, and already in Russia, Chaitanya Chandra Charan has been initiating. And there might be 1 or 2 others. So it's already happening, and you can see many of the second generation devotees, the disciples of Prabhupada's disciples. Often they talk about Prabhupada as if they were with him. And if you didn't know, you would think they were disciples of Prabhupada until someone tells you, right? I think maybe many who met Kadambakanda Swami didn't know he wasn't a disciple of Prabhupada. There wasn't any overt sign that he wasn't. And so that can be true for all of us. And not only, I would say, can that be true? I would say it's essential that it happens this way if the solidarity of the ISKCON movement is going to remain. Otherwise, it can easily fragment into different personality cults that we're all representing. And we all, of course, have our own personalities, and we all represent aspects of Prabhupada, but still we have to represent the whole of Prabhupada as well. Hare Krishna. Okay, now we can go to sleep. No more questions. So I was just joking. And Prabhupada said, you should, whenever you have time, you should chant. You have spare time. Don't waste time. He said, but you utilize your time very nicely by sleeping. Because Prabhupada saw that. How often his servants would be asleep when he called them. You don't want to be asleep when Prabhupada calls you, because it's like, what are you doing? Sleeping on the job. Yeah. So Chaitanya Dasi is bringing up the point that if she sees something wrong and she discusses it with the GBC, then she's going to be in trouble, because they're going to feel that she's offended. And that's why I say that if you report it to the GBC, it should either be reported anonymously or ask them, explain to them that if they know I said this, it's going to disturb our relationship. Of course, then Chaitanya Dasi may say, they're going to know who said it. Then I think the best thing is to find out if there are other devotees that also see it the same way, and then the GBC can say, well, there were several devotees, or there were many devotees who noticed this. So that would help. Then it's not just you, the troublemaker. Even though we know you are a troublemaker, but you're also making trouble by being silent. So you have to choose what kind of troublemaker you want to be. The silent troublemaker or the outspoken troublemaker. And being silent is also, the sins of commission and the sins of omission. So that's the sin of omission. You didn't say anything. You didn't speak up. And that's difficult. I run into the same problem also, like who to speak up to so it doesn't land on deaf ears, and why put out energy, and then there's a possibility of committing offense as well. Getting riled up and then making offenses. So, but it's important, if you see something that you think is wrong, to make sure it is wrong, because the worst thing you could do is complain about something that's not wrong. That's bad for your spiritual life and bad for your relationships, and definitely bad for your profile. People will take you like the boy who cried wolf. You're always complaining. But Prabhupada's point was you should speak up if something's wrong, and you should still cooperate until the things are settled. So I think that's, the perfect balance. It's not like I'm not going to cooperate because it's wrong, but if I don't speak up, I have to go to bed at night with a guilty conscience that I know this is wrong and I didn't, or I'm pretty sure it's wrong and I didn't say anything. Right? And I think it's a great qualification if you can see something's wrong. I don't think it's a disqualification, like, well, I'm a fault finder, I always see what's wrong. That could be there, but simultaneously, it can also mean that it's a great qualification that you actually see what's wrong, and that's a sign of being a good disciple. And, if you learn something from Prabhupada or from your guru, now you have eyes to see what is right. You have eyes to see what is wrong. So after learning and you see something's wrong, then it's your duty to point it out. It's just a question of the best way to do it. The way that it will have the best effect and the least collateral damage, and won't jeopardize relationships, or you won't do it in an offensive way. And, it's subtle. You're walking on eggshells, basically. Or you're walking on gulabs. We don't take eggs. So you're walking on gulabs, and the juice could squirt you in the face. So, gulab jaman. Gulab means rose. You're not walking on roses. You're walking on gulab jamans. Gulab jaman. Hare Krishna. Anything else? Well, this is a really good sign. Everyone is experiencing this ecstatic symptom of being stunned. I didn't know my class was that good. Bhavani says, how do we ensure that the mood of Srila Prabhupada is not being diluted as the congregation increases? It's going to be through education. I'll say something, half joking, half serious. You can be sure it is getting diluted. That's just like, that's the way things go. I mean, Yoga Nashta Parantaba, Krishna says in the Gita, this science was lost. It's, you just look at history. It always gets lost. It always gets watered down. The experiment, you get 10 people and you pass the message. And by the time it gets to the 10th person, it's a different message. So it is human nature. And as disciples of Prabhupada, one of the services we have, or followers of Prabhupada, is to understand the messages as clearly as we can and express it as clearly as we can and correct any expression of it that's not as clearly as it should be expressed or is not correct. And so, education is a problem for the congregation because if you live in a temple and you go to morning and evening class, that's 700 classes a year. So, that's about 650 hours of classes every year. My daughter goes to university. She takes 3 or 4 classes. It's 3 hours a week. I think it's like 19 weeks, say 20. So that's like, that's like 1 semester university. If you went to a class every day for an hour. Well, it's more. Because she's only going for 4 months, for 3 hours a week. Yeah. So it's much more. My math is bad. Yeah. So it's like twice. It's like taking yeah. Anyway, it's like taking a university class, basically, every quarter. So, but so the numbers are not important, but when you live outside the temple, then it's like there's so much you may not learn unless you take it upon yourself to learn it. And there's where the problem lies. And so it's our job to educate ourselves well so we can represent Prabhupada properly, we can represent the philosophy well. Because if you're going to try to help people and teach, you have to obviously give them the proper medicine and the proper dose. And you need to know how to do that. And how to diagnose the disease, what people need. It's not the same for everybody. And the next question, how to say strong words softly? Because when we say the truth, people are getting angry. Sometimes don't say it because they're not ready for it. How to get someone to digest this medicine. Their stomach is weak, they can't, so you have to give them other medicine until they build up their digestion. So that could be there. If you have a relationship with someone and the person trusts you and they know that whatever you say is in their interest, then it's easier. Because even if you get heavy, they'll know it's for your best interest. I just heard this woman say, your wife may complain about you, but she's really trying to help you. Men don't understand that. But if men understand that when they complain, they're actually just trying to help them. Then they can take it. So if someone feels you're trying to help them because you have an appropriate relationship, then you can say things which are true but not so palatable, and they'll accept it. Or you can preface it, Please don't take offense when I say this, but I think that that what you said was not entirely correct, or could be, misunderstood by others, or I think there's more to say. Maybe you didn't have time to say it, but, when you give class next time, maybe you could add this to it. There's ways of doing it. Or probably you didn't know this, but we don't touch this with our left hand. Did anyone ever tell you that? Probably you didn't realize it, but you're chanting the Hare Krishna mantra with 28 syllables, which is why it's only taking you an hour to get it done. Sometimes I'll go up to a devotee and say, you know what I think you should do is turn on your phone and just listen to yourself chant. You might be surprised what you hear. And just say that. You know, I found this really good exercise. I do it myself. I turn my phone on, I listen to myself chant. I go, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, you should try it. It's interesting. And you didn't even say they're not chanting properly. They'll find that out themselves. So, you can be ingenious in your way you want to help people. And as we've often said, it's always good to point out a mistake like a day later or more, rather than the next minute. Yesterday when you burnt that subject, I was just wondering, is there anything I can do? Like, is there a reason that happened? It's not like, because we really don't want that to happen again. So it's a day later, it's easier to deal with, right? Yeah. Do we need to perform valid services in order to be prepared to live in the spiritual world? Yeah. Varied service. Not varied. It's not necessary. Just service. We need to do all the sadhana and then some service. Prabhupada said, some service, whatever it is, something. Be engaged. Otherwise, what are you going to do with your time? Twitter it away, Instagram it away, TikTok it away. You want to hear something? What I just heard? I guess it was during the pandemic, a lot of people got laid off. And and then the government was paying them because they weren't working, at least in America. So they did a little study of what those men were doing. And about 40 hours a week, they were on their phones when they weren't working. So what are you going to do if you don't have service? Going to hang out on your phone and do nothing? It's a good chance. So service is important. It occupies your mind and your senses and your time. If I'm not getting affected mentally by someone's words or any relationship issues, does that expressing with someone, is it okay or not okay? Should we keep that with us? If others are being affected by it, then it has to be dealt with. It's just a question of how. And maybe you don't feel like you're the person to deal with it, but you could ask someone else to deal with it. This is, I think it's an important point. I'm not bothered by it, but is it bothering other devotees? If it is, there should be some concern. Right? Yes? Does that make sense? They just dropped an atom bomb on this country. Well, it doesn't bother me. My country's safe. No. This is a problem. Even if it didn't bomb your house, it's a problem for others. Okay. So, Chaitanya Dasi, is Gormani going to show up? We don't know. But you're here anyway.
She didn't say anything, so I think she will.
Okay.
And I'm here.
She was not home this weekend, so that was part of the problem. She should be back by now. Anyway, we can start. I can share a realization I had. It was a kind of funny realization I had. I don't know if I shared it with you. It was on it was on Janmashtami. I was chanting, and sometimes you might be sitting down and preoccupied, reading something or talking to someone, and somebody sits next to you and you don't notice them. Does that ever happen to you? Or you're chanting japa and someone sits next to you. You open your eyes and you go, oh, you didn't notice they were there. So that's what happened. I was chanting, my eyes were closed, and someone sat next to me, and then I opened them, and I realized, oh, so-and-so's there. I thought, japa is just like that. You're chanting, your eyes are closed, Krishna's sitting next to you, and you could go 16 rounds and not even notice. right? It's like Krishna's there and I didn't notice. Wow, how sad is that? Krishna's sitting next to me during japa and I didn't even notice. Hare Krishna. You can all cry now. That's so bad. Okay, so we can just start chanting and recognizing that Krishna's with us. Or at least trying.